Okay, students, I hope you guys enjoy the movie Walkouts. And there's a lot to learn from the movie, a lot to learn from many articles and interviews. But now we get to learn from a person who was there, Mita Cuaron. You guys just heard her introduction of the movie. And now we're going to find out a little bit more about her personal experience. Okay, Mita, how are you? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So part of us doing this video is to preserve our history. Oftentimes our history is not in the history books. And this movie, Walkout, is helping us to see light at the end of the tunnel, that we are important, that we have a legacy in this country. And Sal Castro begins in the movie by talking about the Mexican Americans who fought in the Civil War, but they were not in the history books.
Right.
So my first question to you is, on behalf of our students, why do you think Mexicans are excluded from the history books? Why are we invisible?
Boy, that's a loaded question, isn't it? Why are we invisible? Because somebody has advantages over that. If you don't know your history, you don't know your ancestors, where does that lead you? You're without, you're groundless. You have no base, you have no context, you have no connection to your ancestors. So if you have no connection to your history and your ancestors, then you start to feel worthless. And then you start to feel depressed. And then you start to feel defeated. And then you start to feel, why bother? I'll take the easy way out. I'll just go to where they tell me to go, to war. And that's the only place that I could feel fulfilled and feel like I'm being patriarch. Okay, stop. You need to stop. I'm having so the only way for us is to feel recognized and be patriotic is to go to war. And to feel that we're part of the system. We are inclusive. We are being welcomed in. Where is that for our education? Why can't that story and connection be for our education? Because a mind, you cannot stop a mind that thinks, but you can stop a mind that doesn't think for itself, for himself or herself, and be led to go to war without a thought, without a second thought. But not to use a mind has advantages for the oppressor.
In the movie Walkout, we see Sal Castro taking students to the camp in Malibu, his Kramer, and many of the students, for the first time, they're introduced to I Am Joaquin poem and the Aztecs and the Mayans and who invented the number 0 and actually feeling proud, a little bit proud of their heritage, but they also begin to question like their identity, like I'm a Chicano, I'm a Mexican American.
Right.
Did you go to that conference when you were in high school?
Yes, right after the walkouts, I went to the Campus Kramer conference in, I guess it was April. And there were hundreds of us. Belmont, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Wilson, and Garfield. And the youth were pretty excited because of our recent activism and walking out. It was earth-shattering what we did. But to describe to you that excitement, my memory goes a blank, but I have a brief memory of being there. So I can imagine that experience was pretty thrilling and exciting, that we had just broken the rules. And it was unprecedented that, what, 20,000 of us walked out. So now we're at the camp and we're talking about history. We're talking about our ancestors, and we're making the connections about our culture, our roots, our heritage. We're feeling pride that gives us identity and purpose and reason and value and a sense of who we are and where we came from.
Yes. You were a student at Garfield High School.
Yes.
You were a 10th grader in 1968. How did you first hear about the student movement to improve the LA City schools?
The first encounter that I had was the meeting that when I met Sal Castro, when he told the community of over 500 people in that room that the schools were failing us. That was my introduction into my politicalization, my sense of consciousness.
But did you get a flyer, an invitation? How did you find out about that meeting? Because you were at Garfield,
Yeah,
he was a teacher
right.
in England.
You know, you're asking me real particular questions. I don't remember, to be honest with you. Back then, people would make a phone call. I guess, you know, there were agencies were there. Social workers were there. So word got around via telephone. You know, how else did it get out?
Yes, yes. And one more question the students always ask when they watch the movie Walkout is how much of it is based on reality and how much of it is drama? Like what percentage would you give it? And what is one event from the movie that you think is dramatized?
Well, the character of Paula, I think, was portrayed in a way, it certainly, it tapped into issues of between the mother and her father, but there were many other stories that was not like that. And that was one of mine. So the drama, well, you know, the scene where Yoli is looking for the bathroom, that whole little scene I thought was, you know, it's a little theatrical, you know, there. But it was true. I mean, we didn't have access to the bathrooms. The brutality of the teachers was real, of swatting the kids for speaking Spanish. That was real. It's a shame that the film just focused on one character, one student, when there were so many of us. I wish there would have been a little bit more conversation in the Paraña house, you know?
So you went to the Piranha as well to
Yes.
meet with other students?
Yes.
And what was that like to have this conversation with other students to decide how to protest for the improvement of the schools? How was that debate? Do you remember a little bit about that?
Well, there was one very famous, not very memorial memory that I had, and that was when in my apartment building, Sal was there, parents were there, students from the other campuses were there, the Brown Berets were there, and we were talking. I remember we were talking, and I can't tell you all the nuts and the bolts in the particular, but it's very indelible in my mind because there was a knock on the door. And you know, if you had to knock on the door, you were somebody that was not welcome because we were all there. So what happens? I open the door. In comes the late Senator Congressman Roy Ball, a judge named Sanchez, and Cardinal McIntyre dressed with his hat and his gown. I don't know if he had his steeple, but he was there to intimidate. So I had the law, I had politician, and I had God all in one room, coming into the room. And this is what they said. You need to stop this. They didn't say, we're sorry that we're here because we're concerned. We're here because we want to hear the children's voices. We're here because we want to be part of the solution and the remedy. But what did they say? Stop. Stop this. You got to stop this right now. With their voice high and their attitude on the high horse and demanding. And do you know what I thought? Here we are, helicopters following us, secret clothesmen following us, taking pictures. I had already gotten beat up on campus at Garfield. And now these three people are demanding that we just put a stop to this. How do you stop that energy? How do you stop that fervor? How do you stop that anger and that frustration and that activism? Because it was like a dam. And how do you stop a dam from flowing over? By putting a peg in there? That's how I thought it was, the momentum. And I was so angry at the tip of their power. Together, the church, the police, the ruling class, the politicians, and God, all telling us to stop. And just in the first week of the walkouts of that week, in the rain, when we were at Garfield running from the park, to go to the St. Alfonso's church, we opened the door, we're knocking on the door, and the priest opens the door and he said, "You get what you deserve. You get what you deserve." That was the underling of this Cardinal McIntyre, who's in my house telling me to stop. Oh my God, I had so many epiphanies that week.
I bet. Definitely. So going back to the walkouts and the injustices that you and your family faced, is that when you were expelled from Garfield High School? Or
Yes.
Can you go a little bit on that day? What happened on that day? That was before the walkouts, correct?
No.
It was after?
No, it was during.
Okay.
During.
Because you were one of the lead organizers at Garfield. So
yes.
They were particularly upset at you. That school administration was
sure.
upset at you. So can you share with us what happened that day?
What happened was the description of what I told you about the meeting, that was week 1. By then, we had to be very careful because we were being followed, monitored, people were following us. I had already been beaten up on the campus, and then this meeting that we were having, and then all these people came to my door. The next week, the atmosphere and the tone of the community, we were under siege. We were completely under siege with the helicopters and the police monitoring us and coming home and listening to, back then, George Putnam. He was our Rush Limbaugh, saying that we were just wild youth, they don't know what they're doing. They're just wild. They don't want to go to school. So, the school system had an agenda to track us, to keep us in our place. And the news portrayed us as righteous, lost, mindless youth who knew nothing and were defying the school system. So it was all organized to portray us as mindless, being dumb, no motivation, no reason, that we should just go along with the plan, to being tracked into unfulfilled jobs with no future, or go to war. So the second week, we had arranged to have a meeting with the school principal. And so there were many parents, many students, but the only parent and the only two students, an adult, that managed to get inside the office of the principal was my father, his sister, my tia, and John Ortiz's brother, and myself. And then the doors closed behind us. And the principal comes out of his office. And he looks at my father and he says, Buster, if you don't stop this, if you don't put a stop to this, I'm not going to allow you to have a meeting. You're nobody. You're worthless. Nobody looks up to you. And you should be ashamed, with his finger. You should be ashamed of preventing your daughter from getting an education. Now wrap your head around that. The lie, the misinformation, the prevailing notion that Mexicanos don't use their mind because they don't have a mind to use it. They like to work with their hands. And this principal is saying, it's my father's fault from preventing me from getting an education. The same school that he went to as a young man, as a young student. So he threatened us and he said, if you don't leave here, I'm going to call the sheriffs. So my father said, well, you got to do what you got to do. So we stood there back to back, frozen. It was like being frozen in time. I kept looking at the clock. And I felt the tension. You could cut it with a knife. Secretaries sitting down, quiet, very quiet. All of a sudden, like a swarm of bees or hornets, doors opening, swarms of sheriffs coming in, lifting our bodies, throwing us to the floor, twisting our limbs. There must have been 20 of them for 4 people. They yanked us up. I can remember with an arm across my throat and my arms twisted with handcuffs. Seeing my tia all wrapped up with handcuffs and twisted. My father's body all twisted. We were all twisted. We were all twisted. Like our limbs were where they shouldn't have been. It was so painful. They wouldn't let us walk. They were dragging us. But I had a weapon. And that weapon was my voice. And I was going to not let them get away with this. So I screamed and I yelled, look at what they're doing to us. As they took us down the stairs outside the buildings on the front lawn. windows opening. You could see all the students looking down at us as they dragged us into the car. And when they drove us to the 3rd Street Sheriff's Station and booked us, they didn't even have the decency to put my tia and me in the same cell. We were next door to each other. So the only comfort we had was talking to each other and extending our hand out to hold our hands that whole day.
And you were expelled that day.
I was expelled for 2 weeks. So by then I had been out of school for a whole month. And so when I came back, we had to face that monster of the principal. I don't remember what was said, but you could have cut it with a knife. It was so thick. The conversation between the principal and my father, and I'm sitting there. So I'm walking down the hall to my class, history class, Chicano. And all of a sudden, the teacher, the doors open. His name was Turnco. Turnco. He looks up. He says, "Oh, look who decided to come back to school after all the trouble she did to prevent you from getting an education. She caused all the trouble." I stood in the doorway, shocked, as if I was the sole perpetrator for this whole debacle, that I was responsible for this whole mess. Not to question oppression, not to question racism, not to question tracking system, not to question choices, not to question that we were getting we were not getting a deal. We weren't even being offered to go to college and university. Nothing of that was in his discussion. It's just that I took it upon myself to disrupt this whole school system, turning it upside down. And he said, "And you know what? I don't care what you do in my classroom. I'm going to fail you." And you know what? He did fail me. He failed me, a history teacher. But you know what? I learned about the Constitution, not in the classroom, but in the street. And that was my lesson in US government, on the street.
Yes. And Sal Castro, I'm sure, played a major role in that political consciousness. But going back to Sal Castro, this teacher, were other teachers supportive of Sal Castro, or were?
There were very few, and I don't remember their names. I remember there was maybe a couple teachers at Garfield, and there were a cadre of other teachers at Lincoln, but I don't remember their names.
Yeah. So when Sal Castro was arrested along with the East LA 13,
yes,
how did you respond to that?
Well, it was terrible. It was scary. I maybe went to one protest in his defense, but it's so long ago, I can't remember.
And so when the whole movement unraveled and the East LA 13 were incarcerated for several days, and Sal Castro was dismissed from his job.
Right.
People had to fight to get his
job back. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What do you think that the legacy, the impact, the immediate impact of the walkouts had on you and other students?
We made a difference. We made a difference. We made a difference in our community. We started to see that our community was just as deserving as any other community. Because when I saw the campus of Fairfax, I was shocked. There were no fences. There were no bars on the windows. The library was huge and the bathrooms were unlocked. And it was like going to a university. And what does that do to your soul? To your sense of who you are, of why can't my community be this way? Having the schools look like this. Why are my schools looking so forlorn?
Yes. Two more questions. And the other question is, students right now in 2022 are facing not the same conditions as you guys did in 68, but we still have inequalities in our schools.
Mhm.
We still have overcrowded classrooms. We still have a lack of ethnic studies or Chicano studies in our schools. What advice or recommendations do you have for students who want to improve the environment in their schools? What would you tell them?
The best way in this battle is to educate your mind and go to college. Educate your mind, because this is a narrative that is false, reckless, and morally wrong by not giving you doors to open instead of the doors being closed. In this time, with this, what is it called? The critical race theory. I walked out to have ethnic studies. I walked out to have books about our history and culture and our ancestors. I walked out to have libraries. I walked out to improve the conditions. And now 50 years later, you're going to throw this in my face? This system of patriarchy and white privilege, they are so scared out of their mind that they keep having the same ridiculous theories. Listen, we got to coexist with each other. We can't be doing this. It's what makes war. It's what creates fascism. So educate your mind and go to college. That's the way to this battle.
Beautiful, beautiful. And to conclude, you've been to auditorium at Garfield High School.
Yes.
You've been there with 1,300 students, 70 teachers. You having a microphone on you, and if we were in person, you will be there for sure. But we are doing this digital. What would you say to these students looking at you in the microphone? And this is like our conclusion to this beautiful assembly and talk about discussion after the movie Walkout. What will be your final message to these students, to this generation of new Garfield students who are following your footsteps? What will you tell them?
I would tell them that 50 years ago, we did this. We did this for you, so you wouldn't have to do it. This is so unnecessary. Why do we have to keep repeating this? It takes the student away. It takes them away from the valuable time of learning about themselves and about their ancestors and their history. Why do we have to reinvent this wheel again? Only one generation should have to do that. We know the ills. We know the harm. We know the inadequacies. We know all of that narrative. We don't have to do that again. So the next generation will have it better. And that's why I brought this critical race theory crap up. They want to erase us, that we do not exist. And so, as much as I don't want them to have to go out and walk out again, that they use us as their ancestors to stand on our shoulders, to be the next warriors. I don't want them to have to resort to that, but if that's what has to be, so that we get this right, so that in 50 years we don't have to do this again, it's criminal. It's criminal.
You know that last time you were at Garfield, you finished your speech by saying Chicano power. And you were loud and you raised your fist up, Chicano power. What does Chicano mean for you? Like the word Chicano, Chicana. What does it make you feel? What is it for you?
It's my heart and my soul. It's my body. It's the voice of my ancestors. It's the voice of my roots, my culture. And when I raise my fist, it's about me. It's about my son. It's about my family. It's about everybody. It's about our soul, our consciousness, our dignity, our fervor, our strength, our humanity. They cannot take it away from us. That's what that means to me.
Thank you so much, Mita Cuaron. Now, I'm a humble teacher at Garfield High School, and I will continue to try to keep that flame strong and alive and reach out to our students. We have a lot of responsibility, and I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of it. I welcome it, and our students are very honored, very privileged to hear this message from you. So I want to say thank you, and hasta la próxima, okay? It's not a goodbye, but we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Students, that's Mita Cuaron, okay? See you soon. Stay strong.